Today we are going today we are going to look at Ezra and Nehemiah.
I
Um,
hope you don't expect us to be able to say all those names.
yes, in fact, those are all the chapters we're going to read today.
She was reading that.
Oh, nothing but names. It's
There
like,
are a
oh
lot
my
of different names.
gosh.
Those are all the words. Those are the only chapters we're going to focus on today. Get
Well, I
accustomed.
zoomed through them.
You zoomed through them.
Yeah, I didn't read. Yeah.
I have an audio Bible because they will say the names and I gave up. It's just like
Oh
even
yes.
listening to
Oh
somebody else
yes.
say the
Oh
names is like
yes.
this is crazy.
Oh yes.
Nope.
Um, now the name Ezra means Yahweh helps. It can mean also
Mm.
helper. That's what the name Ezra means.
And
Um,
Yahweh what?
helps.
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 Oh, Yahweh helps. Oh.
Mhm.
Huh.
Um, um, at one time, Ezra and Nehemiah were the two books were one. There was one single work written, but later on it became divided, and some of the historical chronology was also altered a bit. Um, it is always the belief that Ezra is who wrote the book, and also that he wrote Nehemiah, and it is also thought that he also wrote First and Second Chronicles, which comes just before Ezra, if my mind serves me correctly. That he wrote First and Second Chronicles, that he wrote Ezra, he wrote Nehemiah, and some scholars even think that he wrote Psalm 119, which is the longest psalm in the Bible, in the book of Psalms. But Ezra is so revered, as you know, well, he was a scribe, but he is so revered that if you have a book, and probably George knows this more so because I know the Roman Church used the apocryphal books more even than the Episcopal Church. But there is First and Second Book of Esdras, which is um, which means in Greek Ezra. So there are books of there Esdras, there are First and Second books of that are referring to Ezra. And then, and if you even go further than the apocryphal books to what can also be called the deuterocanonical books, um, you may come across books, or sometimes they're called the forgotten books. You may come across books or writings that did not make the Bible, the scriptures, that are also attributed to Ezra, like the Apocalypse of Ezra, and there's one called the Revelation of Ezra, the Vision of Ezra, the Questions of Ezra. So there's a whole lot of writings attributed to Ezra, to Ezra, which gives you um, an idea as to the kind of, of, for lack of a better word, significance or prominence um, that he has when it comes to writings and so forth. There's a lot written on him or by him. Now, he was a priest. He was a descendant of the priestly Hebrew tribe. And anyone know what is the Hebrew tribe called? The priestly Hebrew tribe called?
Benjamin?
No.
Weren't they Levites?
The Levites,
Yes,
correct.
yes.
The Levites, correct. So he was a descendant of them, and his being a descendant stretches right back to the first high priest, which was
Levi.
no high priest. Who was the first high priest that the Bible mentions about?
Judah and Benjamin.
No, Aaron, Moses' brother.
Oh, oh.
Yes,
Yeah.
Moses, Aaron, Moses'
Okay.
brother. And so his line traces back to Aaron. He was also a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses, and he devoted himself to the study and observance of the law. He was also a teacher, which means that he was committed to teaching God's word to others. And also he applied the word to his own life. So that tells us a little bit about him. He also followed and obeyed the commands he discovered in God's word personally. So in other words, he was very much a godly man, um, as far as we can tell. He also, when we first meet him, we meet him as in Babylon, in exile, and under the reign of a foreign king. And he was among those Jews who remained captive in Babylon. And even when some came home, he was not in the first batch of those who went home. Now, as we know, they were in exile, both him and Nehemiah and others were in exile. Jerusalem was devastated. The temple was destroyed. And all of this came about, as we know, in those days, once you were disobedient to God, there was punishment. And the punishment was that they were in exile. However, when Cyrus of Persia, he went to battle with the king of Babylon and captured Babylon. And after he captured Babylon, out of all the kings that were, for lack of a better word, Gentile kings, all the kings who would have captured the Israelites and had them in exile, both when they were captured by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, it was the Persian king who was more welcoming to them. And as if we read the two books, both of Ezra and Nehemiah, you will realize that God was with Cyrus, that God was with Cyrus. And so Cyrus allowed the people to return back to Jerusalem to have their life started again. Now, as I said, Ezra didn't go home at the same time, but he did eventually decide to go home. And when he decided to go home, even before he went home, he used to be in communication with those who went home at first, and he was still, in a way, keeping them on track or trying to keep them on track spiritually, and also sometimes he would help them financially in terms of the rebuilding efforts. However, when he did decide to go home, he took over, I believe, he took about 5,000 people with him. That was including men, women, and children. And he took a lot of
Father, I'm a little bit late. What chapter are we on?
We are not in a chapter right now, Bryce. I'm just we will read a couple of verses shortly, but we're not reading the chapter right now.
Okay, so I keep my book closed instead, correct?
Yeah, well, no, you can keep it open to Ezra. because we will think. And the other thing is too is it's that we before I even go on there, we have to look at, even when you look at the book of Ezra, the first 6 chapters, it doesn't really tell you about Ezra.
No, it doesn't.
You don't pick him up until in chapter 7, really.
There's only 10 chapters of Ezra.
Yes, they
Yes.
are. But he also carries over into Nehemiah, where you have parts of Nehemiah that deals with Ezra as well. But what I was saying is that when he went home, he decided to go home. And when he was decided to go home, he was going home at a time when there was some instability in the Persian Empire. And even though he feared attacks, that he will probably get attacked while on his way home, because it was like a 900-mile trek to get where he needed to go. He still refused to take military escort, although the king would have given it to him. He refused military escort because he did not want to ask him for protection, because he had once told the king that God was able to protect and care for those who follow him. And if he had gone to the king and asked him for protection, the king would want to know, well, what happened to your God? You tell me he can protect you, or you need my own protection.
Right.
And so Ezra refused to ask. And what he did was that everyone, he himself included, had to humble themselves before God and to ask God for a safe journey. And we read that in Ezra chapter 8, where he asked God for a safe journey, and he got it. He got home safely, and it became then really a test of really putting your faith in God and not in yourself. And it took them about 4 months, I think it was, to get back to Jerusalem, but they did get back there safely. And then once he got to Jerusalem, he set out to carry out what his mission was, and that is rebuilding the spiritual aspect of the people. And that is what his aim was to do. Now, the other thing I should mention is that remember that when the exiles were going back from Persia and some Babylonian from the Persian Empire, which was Babylon was now part of the Persian Empire, when the people were moving back to Jerusalem, they didn't all go in one time. They all went in various batches. And Ezra's batch was just another one of them. Nehemiah went as well in a different batch. Nehemiah and Ezra did not go together. And there's still some dispute as to which one went first, whether Ezra went before Nehemiah or Nehemiah went before Ezra. But that is not necessarily what is important, which went first. But there is some problems as to which one went back to Israel first. So what happened is that when Ezra's group arrived in Jerusalem, remember the vessels and the items and everything, the treasures of the temple were taken by the Babylonian king when they went into exile, and then the Persian king got those when he captured Babylon and gave them back to Ezra to take back to Jerusalem. And so when he took them back, they were delivered to the temple, and burnt offerings were made to God as a thank offering for getting them back. But as I said, Ezra's primary purpose when he got back to Jerusalem was to restore the spiritual aspect, to restore the temple worship, to restore observance of the law. That was his major thing. However, he faced a number of crises. And the first biggest crisis he faced was that there were Israelites who were married to people that were not Jews. They were married to people who were pagan. They took pagan wives from neighboring countries. And I want us to read Ezra. We are going to read Ezra chapter 9. Let's turn to Ezra chapter 9. So if someone can read for me verses 1 to 7, and another person from 8 to the end. It has 15 verses. Who wants to read? I see
I'll do it.
Marilyn. Oh, okay. I see Marilyn's hand first, and then I heard Bryce's voice. So Marilyn, can you read 1 to 7 and Bryce 8 to 15 for me, please?
Ezra's prayer about intermarriage. After these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from their neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the
Ammonites.
the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, and have mingled with the holy race, with the peoples around them. And the leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. When I heard this, I tore my tunic and cloak, pulled hair from my head and beard, and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of God of Israel gathered around me because of this unfaithfulness of the exiles. And I sat there appalled until the evening sacrifice. Then, at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my self-abasement with my tunic and cloak torn, and fell on my knees with my hands spread out to the Lord my God, and prayed. Oh my God, I am too ashamed and disgraced to lift up my face to you, my God, because of our sins are higher than our heads, and our guilt has reached to the heavens. From the days of our forefathers until now, our guilt has been great. Because of our sins, we and our kings and our priests have been subjected to the sword and captivity, to pillage and humiliation at the hand of foreign kings, as it is today.
Thank you, Marilyn. Go ahead, Bryce.
But now we have been given a brief moment of grace. For the Lord our God has allowed a few of us on to survive as a remnant. He has given us security in this holy place. Our God has brightened our eyes and granted us some relief from our slavery. We were slaves, but in unfailing love, our God did not abandon us in our slavery. Instead, we have caused the kings of Persia to treat us favorably. We revealed us so we could rebuild the temple of our God and repair its ruins. He has given us a protection wall in Judah and in Jerusalem. And now, O our God, what can we say after all of this? For once again, we have abandoned your commands. Your servants, the prophets, warned us when they said, the land you are entering to possess is totally defiled by detestable practices of the people living there. From one end to the other, the land is filled with corruption. Don't let your daughters marry their sons. Don't take their daughters as wives for your sons. Don't even permit the peace and prosperity of those nations. If you follow these instructions, you will be strong and will enjoy the good things the land produces, and you will leave this prosperity to your children forever. Now there we're being punished because of our wickedness and our great guilt, but we have actually been punished far less than we deserve. For you, our God, have allowed us to survive as a remnant. But even so, we are again breaking up your commands and intermarrying with people who do these detestable things. Won't your anger be enough to destroy us, so that even the little remnant no longer survives? O Lord God of Israel, you are just. We come before you in our guilt as nothing but an escaped remnant. Through in such a condition, none of us can stand in your presence.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Bryce. Now you see here in chapter 9, how you hear about Ezra's plea about all that the people of Israel were doing, and even priests and Levites did not separate themselves from the peoples. They were married to them, and they were also being involved in the actions, the practices, detestable or whatever actions you want to call them, that they were being involved in. And you see, in other words, what they had done is to violate God's commands, and that was extremely heartbreaking for Ezra. And you find that it was so heartbreaking that the man pulled out his hair and his beard. You can imagine how much you can imagine how that could have been, huh? And he wept, and he more or less fell on his knees, and spread out to the Lord, and he prayed to the Lord. And one of the things that we realize here, which is quite an action that is profound, is that in Ezra's prayer from verse 6 on down to the end, you see Ezra confessing to God what the people did, the sins of the people. But what is important here is that Ezra had not sinned in the way the people sinned. He didn't. However, he identified with their sins, and he saw himself as part of that. So it wasn't only the people that sinned, it was him also. All of them together had not obeyed God's commands, and so it caused him to cry, and he felt that the people, that they all needed to come to God again and repent of their sins. And so and so this crisis that he faced was that, yes, the Israelites married people from other nations. Yes, he realized that the Israelites were unfaithful. He was appalled at it. He was shocked. And therefore, what he does is that he gets himself involved in a prayer of lament and a prayer. I'll let you speak, Susan. In a prayer of lament, where a prayer of anguish, so that God will have mercy on his people for the sins that they have committed. And if you remember, I don't remember, I can't remember if it was last Sunday or the Sunday before. I was talking, well, it was Sunday, it wasn't the Sunday just gone. It was the Sunday before, where I talked about communal sins, where we sin, oh gosh, we sin individually, but we also sin communally or corporately. And here, this is an example of how the people sinned corporately, some communion. And Ezra is praying to God for the sins of the whole. Yes, Susan.
Oh, okay. Well, first, I've got allergies going on, so my eyes are all
That's
itchy.
all right. That's all right.
So why was he a slave? And why was it?
Who a slave?
He said we were slaves, Ezra.
Tell me again, what verse are you talking about?
I can't remember where we read it. He said we were slaves.
That's in the prayer. It's in the
Oh,
prayer.
in the prayer. Oh, yes.
Though
Yes.
we are slaves, our God has
Yes.
not abandoned us.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Verse 9.
So slaves of what? And then why was it so terrible to marry outside? Marry someone that wasn't Jewish because they might get pagan ideas? Is that why?
Well, first thing is, in terms of the slaves thing, it was because they were in exile. They were, and also to you remember, they were, well, not, I don't think it's in this case, but originally they were slaves in Egypt. They were in bondage in Egypt. So they were slaves then. But this is, I think, what Ezra is referring to, if my mind serves me correctly, is that he's referring to the fact that they were slaves in, because he says here, though we are slaves, our God has not forsaken us in our bondage. He has shown us kindness in the sight of the kings of Persia. So he's referring to them because they were in captivity, exile, if you want to call it, in Babylon. That is what he's referring to.
Okay.
Okay. And the second thing you asked was, tell me again.
Well, marrying outside of,
Oh, that was a no-no with the Jewish people. That was a no-no. And that is why, if you remember, if you know the history between Jews and Samaritans, that was a big problem with Jews and Samaritans. It wasn't that Samaritans were totally Gentile. They were not. They were Jewish, but they had married outside and diluted their the whole ethnicity, if you want, for lack of a better word, and that is what caused Jews to be against, to dislike Samaritans. And also remember, Jews did not like anybody else except if you were a real Jew.
so that was one of their laws. You just stick within
That
your.
was the long and short of it. And if you, and so they're marrying folks outside of their religion, because just think about it. When you go and you marry Gentiles, at that time they were called pagans. In other words, they were heathens, and they would worship, as far as the living God is concerned, but they worship all these other idols and gods that they had, these pagan gods. Obviously, too, it would dilute the Jewish religion. And so that was
That's why it was so horrible.
So that it was really taboo as a Jew. You could not marry outside your, whatever you want to call it, your religion, your race.
Well, also, non-Jewish people wouldn't be following all the 600 rules that Jewish people follow.
Correct.
And they would not know how to be clean. They wouldn't follow the rituals, food preparation. I mean, there's a lot of things about marrying a non-Jewish person that would be wrong.
Correct. And even when they went over to Christianity and some of the Jews became Christians and the Gentiles became Christians, the Jews still wanted to impose some of their practices on the Gentiles who were becoming Christians, because they still could not wrap their hands around, how am I going to be a brother or a sister of this guy who don't follow any of our practices at all, who is not, for the biggest part of it, who's not even circumcised. It's a big taboo. And so yes.
Okay, they listed all the names, so they were okay. Thanks.
So yes. Now you would also find that when you get into the 10, I'm not going to read. No, majority of that chapter has the majority of it has a whole set of names, or at least half of the chapter has a whole set of names that we will not go into today. But I mentioned that because you will see here that it was probably winter time. It was cold. It was rainy on that day, and Ezra will speak to the folks after praying. Well, even the people came and found it.
Father, we're losing you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we're losing you
You're
again.
not.
Okay. Yeah, you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
That's because I went to. So when I went here, you kept hearing me. Yes. Oh gosh.
Where's your headset?
Home. because I'm usually at home for this. But I was here because I had counseling this evening, so it runs straight into this. So, but I have it home because I usually do this class from at home, so that's
All
why
right.
that's why I keep it at home and I don't travel with it back and forth.
It's on a mission.
But while Ezra was praying and confessing and weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, you realize that the large crowds of the Israelites in chapter 10, the men, women, and children gather around him, and they too started weeping bitterly. And this is where Ezra says to them, we have been unfaithful to our God. Well, not them, not he, but one of the descendants of Elam said to Ezra that we have been unfaithful to our God by marrying these foreign women. But the good thing is that there's still hope for Israel, and that they need to make a covenant to get back on track. And when and so you find then that Ezra gets up and he puts everybody under oath, the leaders, well, not everybody, but the leading priests and the Levites, and then they take the oath, and then he decides to make a proclamation that anyone who refuses to where is it? Verse 7, a proclamation was then issued throughout Judah and Jerusalem for all the exiles to assemble in Jerusalem. And if you did not assemble in Jerusalem, then you can get your properties taken away. And you would all also be expelled from the assembly as well. And so every person gathered, and then that you find then is when Ezra tells them in a short sermon and to the point. He says, the people have sinned. We need to confess. We need to repent. We need to separate from these foreign spouses. And I like it. And I like it when we look at verse where it is. When they all, in verse 12 and 13, the whole assembly responded with a loud voice, "You are right. We must do as you say. But there are many people here, and it's rainy season, so we cannot stand outside. Besides, this matter cannot be taken care of in a day or two." And because we have sinned greatly in this thing. And so Ezra told them that we have been unfaithful. You have added to Israel's guilt. You have not honored God. You have separated yourselves from God, but more so, you have separated yourselves from the people around you, and you need to separate yourselves from your foreign wives. And so, the first thing, as I said, he said, you have to confess, repent, and separate from these wives. And yep, the people were saddened. It tells you that the people were saddened at first. However, they said he was right, and they were in agreement to do it, except for 4 people. And you see that in verse 15, where it tells you the 4 who were opposed to this new edict or proclamation. I think it tells you about 113 people. All names are here if you count them, I think. They're all listed there who were guilty of intermarriage, beginning with the priests, and come right down to the end.
What do you think, Father, what do you think happened to the children? Because I see the last verse, it says, all these were married foreign women, and some of these wives had given birth to children.
And I mean, in the Bible, and you get closer to it, it tells you that they were put away. But put away just mean that they were sent. They would not have been killed or anything like that. I just think that they had to send them away.
Okay.
Obviously, there had to be divorces. I think it mentions that the judges, they had to implement judges who went about divorcing, having all of these divorces, so that, yes, Marilyn?
My text says some of the marriages had produced children, but this was not accepted as a reason for halting the divorce.
Correct.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have that. Okay.
Yeah, so they were divorced. There were judges who were set up, who were appointed to handle the divorce proceedings. And it took, I think, like 3 months to take care of all of that. Yes, George?
The concept of not marrying outside of your faith. When I was growing up Roman Catholic,
You couldn't.
you had to marry another Roman Catholic.
Correct. I know that. And I was going to get to that too, because and I'm sure that's still the
That's right.
same in some parts today. Because I mean, in the Roman church now, if my mind, you could correct me, if you marry outside your faith, your children have to be Roman. That is a stipulation still up to today.
You
that
have to promise to raise them in the
promise to
Roman
raise the
Catholic
children
faith.
Roman. You have to do so. That starts with they need to be baptized Roman, and receive communion and confirmed and be raised Roman. And if you do not do that, then you are no longer considered Roman. You have stepped outside of the faith. So that is a thing. Even in other churches, even, I mean, as I was saying this morning, you have this between religions, a Muslim and a Christian, but it happens within your own Christian faith. And what George is referring to is Roman Catholic. You couldn't even marry Lutheran, Methodist, or Episcopalian, or no one like that. You had to be, unless you promise that the children will be brought up Roman Catholic.
Father.
Yes, Marilyn.
Isn't there something in the New Testament about Christians marrying non-Christians, or Christians going into business with non-Christians being unequally yoked?
Unequally yoked. Unequally yoked. But the thing about it is that, and I see Dorothy's hand. But in the New Testament talks about unequally yoked. But part of that too, it can also be interpreted in terms of meaning that, for example, should a baptized person marry an unbaptized person, which will also be classified as unequal. And so much so that even so, because of that verse, if I am doing weddings of folks and one is baptized and another one is not, I always try to make sure that the other one is baptized before they're married, because it brings about a whole lot of things. But yes, George, that whole notion of unequally yoked would have come about like making sure that when you are married to some person, you share the same perspectives in it.
My husband's brother, when he was in his 20s, he was Lutheran and wanted to marry a Jewish girl, and the Lutheran church would not marry them. They got married in a Unitarian church.
Now, was that Wisconsin Synod or Missouri Synod Lutheran? Was that ELCA?
I don't know. It was Utica, New York. I don't know what Lutheran church they were. But
how long was this ago? You said your brother?
No, my husband's brother. It was in the 1960s. So, and it could be because of the baptismal thing,
It could be.
She being Jewish, she was not baptized. He was baptized, and it was in the 1960s, and they just said, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, and that is quite possible. I know, and I was even telling the story this morning to the others that were there. About Marilyn would have heard it, but I said to something like this came up, and I said to them that oh gosh, I had a friend in Illinois. The pastor whose church was closest to mine in proximity geographically, he was a Missouri Synod Lutheran. And they are very strict, although the Wisconsin one is even more strict. People don't think much about the Wisconsin one because there's not as many of them apparently as the Missouri Synod, but the Missouri Synod.
I didn't know the Lutherans had differences.
Oh yes, there's the ELCA, there's the Missouri Lutheran, there's the Wisconsin Lutheran. I mean, Maryland probably know all of them, but the thing about it is, when it came to Thanksgiving, we had a ministerial alliance in O'Fallon, and when it came to Thanksgiving, we would invite all the congregations from the churches in O'Fallon to a Thanksgiving service the Tuesday before, either the Monday or Tuesday before Thanksgiving Day of the same week. And the pastors will come together and take part in the service. And we will each year go to a different church to have it. So, and it was an ecumenical service. It was not a mass. But when it was being held in when it was being held, this Missouri Lutheran pastor, although he and I went to lunch every month, once a month, and unfortunately he just died a couple of weeks ago, and his funeral was on Saturday, but he couldn't go. He could not even go and take part in the service. His people did not come. And it had to do with the fact that they were so strict, he could not participate. And I used to say to him, Vern, this is utter nonsense. Are you going to think that you're going to be able to be by yourself when you get to heaven and all the rest of us around doing what we're doing? You think that's really what can happen? Well, if you think so, and then I even said to her one day, I says, or even if you went to hell, you think you can be separate from the ones in hell? You think it matters? You think it matters? So we always used to have that, and I will tell you this: he was probably, to say, one of the more liberal of the lot. But
we did that in Bloomington too. We had ecumenical services on Ash Wednesday. So we would rotate churches every year, and the different pastors would come and preach. So that was nice.
But it used to be wonderful. It was wonderful, and it used to be well attended. But he missed out on it because the Missouri Lutheran Synod Lutherans were not supposed to mingle and dingle.
Really? Wow.
So
I have something to say.
Wait a minute, hold on, Linda and then Bryce.
Oh, I was just going to say our brother, Susan, our brother Michael, married a Jewish girl, and they were married in the United Nations Chapel because that's where they could find someone that would marry them.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Bryce.
Yeah, what was I going to say? Is that if you like priests, pastors are not allowed to be married at all if they minister to God. You're only married to God if you're a priest, as a pastor in the Catholic Church.
Not all of them, Bryce. Not all of them.
Really? I thought all Roman pastors have to be married to God, and they're not supposed to have marriage at all.
Well, I'll tell you that. Oh, you're talking about Roman pastors. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you're talking about Roman pastors. But let me say this about Roman pastors, and again, George can correct me. As far as I don't know if I could call it more the Western part of the Roman Church, where yes, the priests are not allowed to marry, but even then, in the Roman Church, there are Roman priests that are married in more on the eastern side. But I would also tell you this. That and this is where, George and I will have a thing, a button of heads here, because
Don't
and this
worry,
is
I've
one of-
done it for years with them.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I do not understand. This is one of the things. This is one of the things I don't understand with the Roman Church, and I'm not bashing them or anything, but the Roman Church will allow me, as an Episcopal priest with a wife and children, to become a Roman priest. But it will not allow George, who is born in a Roman church and get married and have children or what have you, to become a Roman priest.
Right.
Because he was never an Episcopal priest. And that happens. I know Episcopal priests who have become Roman priests, and they have their children, their wives, and everything.
Oh,
And,
okay. Okay, so if they're Episcopal, that's different then. And they became
that happens. And I'll tell you that it was even happening. It was even happening. It was happening for quite some time. Pope Benedict made it official, but it was happening even before that, unofficially. So yes, go ahead, Marilyn.
Same with the Eastern Orthodox.
Yes, correct. So it is all this dichotomy and all this going all over the place. So, but that's why I say we can't be bashing folks, because I always say everybody's searching for the truth or for truth, and we come at it at different angles. And that is why we need to allow God to be God. That's what we need to do. Allow God to be God. He will take care of the whole thing in his own time and in his own way. We are just supposed to do two things: love him and love all people. Let him deal with your ass. Go ahead, George.
I just wanted to comment that in the Roman Church, if you're a deacon,
you can be married, correct?
You can be married, but if your wife dies, you cannot remarry.
Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that.
And if
but
you
can't get remarried, let me ask you a question. Can you become a priest?
I don't know.
I would like to know the answer to that question, because
I believe
sorry.
If you're a divorced person, you can become a priest.
Really?
I would have thought if your wife died, you
you're
could
right.
become a priest.
If you're a widower, you can become a priest.
You probably could become a priest if you're a widower, because
that vow was over.
Correct. Once you're a widow, it means that you're no longer married, that you're seen as not married. So you probably, if you were a deacon, you could become a priest. But yeah, I did not know that. Thank you for sharing that. I never knew that that you could not remarry if you. So wait a minute. Let me ask you another question then. If you remarried, they take away your ordination as a deacon?
Yes, they do.
I don't know.
I don't really know for a fact.
All right, wait, hold on, Bryce. I want to hear Joyce. Hear George.
I know that if a priest marries, he can no longer practice as a priest.
He's no longer a priest.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I believe he's still a priest, but he cannot practice, because once you're ordained, you're ordained.
As a Roman.
Okay.
As a Roman.
As a Roman. Okay.
Right.
So he can no longer practice. And the reason why I ask that is because of we have a priest in our diocese, in down south, who was a Roman priest, but was caught with a woman who he eventually married, but he moved from being a Roman priest to an Episcopal priest, which also happens as well. We got this crossing over, the Roman priest become an Episcopal priest, and the Episcopal priest become a Roman priest, and then
all good.
That is happening, and it's happening more than we think it is. It is happening. So yeah, but I'm glad for that information, because I did not know that if you're a deacon, because I knew deacons you could be married in the Roman church, but you cannot go any higher than being a deacon. I knew that once you were married, but I did not know that if your wife died, you could not remarry. I did not
That
know
is one of the things that kept me from thinking about it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. That is interesting. You learn something every day. Yes, ma'am.
So just don't forget that this is not something that has always been true in the Roman Catholic Church.
That is true.
It's
That is
only
true.
since the 11th century.
Correct.
There were many, many popes who were married.
Were married.
to children,
Correct.
and in fact, they often ordained their children as cardinals.
Correct.
It was
That
a
is true. Because I was
very
good.
human enterprise.
And I'm
Which is
glad you
another way of
mentioned that.
saying that there was corruption at its heart.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean, as I say to people, and then I didn't say it here, but I was presuming that you all knew that, because if you go straight back to the Bible, the person that the Roman Church calls the first Pope of Rome, which is Peter, we are told that he had a mother-in-law, that she was ill, that Jesus went and anointed her and healed her. So, I mean, if the first Pope of Rome was married, we know that there were others that got married. Now, since we're on this, and I want us to get off the Roman Church and stop hammering George, we need to get off of this. But I got a question here for you, George. And I don't know if you know the answer to it. I have been given an answer, but I am not sure if that's the answer. Why did they change that law? Why did they stop priests from getting married? Do you know the answer to that?
No,
I have no idea.
You don't know. Because I was told.
Must have been a king.
I was told the reason for this, and bishops and all that, from getting married. The reason I was told is that the way how the Roman Church is set up, obviously, you know, it's different how the Episcopal or the Anglican Communion is set up. And where for example, I'll give you just a little background history. For example, in the Episcopal Church, the diocese, if anything is going on in the diocese that is property related, except for when it's like your individual parishes, the bishop is the one who is seen as the owner. So even like, for example, when, like at All Saints, for example, if a document comes and it needs the signature of the owner of All Saints, the owner of All Saints is Father Tony Holder. But that does not mean that he owns it tangibly. It just means that he is in charge of the parish and he goes as a representative of the parish as the owner, and therefore will sign on behalf of the parish the same way that Bishop Eaton signs on behalf of the diocese when it's property-related matters. And nobody else should sign in a situation like that. However, in the Roman Church, I understand is the bishops, and I don't know if it's still the same, I guess it's still the same. The bishops actually own the property. It is almost that it's invested in the bishop. And therefore, why this matter was changed is that when bishops got divorced, their wives took half the property, or at least some of the property. And that is why they had to stop doing this, because wives were walking away with some of the church's property. And when I heard that, I was like, could that be true? Would it not have been easier just to make it like how the Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church is, where, yeah, the priest or the bishop is the owner, but only in terms of for signing documents, but not that they own the property per se. Than just saying, well, stop the priest from getting married, so that they could still own the property. That made no sense to me, but that's what I was told was the reason. Now, whether that is still the same today is a different story. But we're talking back out, as Pam said, out in the 1100s. Yes, Dorothy.
I will check with Nathaniel, who is a theologian. He teaches.
Oh, yes, your son-in-law.
seminarians.
Yes, your son-in-law.
So he was going, that's an interesting story because he wanted to be a priest. He was thinking about after graduating from Notre Dame, going to seminary school. Then he met my stepdaughter, and he realized that he wanted to get married and have babies and all. So anyway, he is an expert, and I wrote it down, and I will ask Nathaniel.
Yes, ask him that question. Why did they change the policy for priests and bishops not to get married?
Right.
Because it was not always the case.
No, it wasn't. That's a good question. He'll know the answer.
Because I would like to know if the answer I was given is true, because I cannot believe.
I don't think the one you were given is.
I cannot believe. I cannot believe that you will stop people from getting married just because of ownership of property invested in them. I mean, just
like
change the
baby out.
Just change the ownership. I mean,
there's got to be more to that, right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on with Ezra, and so, you will find too that where was I? Oh yes. So it gives you the list of the Israelites, among them the priests. We saw there in chapter 10 the priests and Levites and all of those who agree to divorce their wives, and they all made guilt offerings for the transgressions in marrying them, which is keeping with the law. And so we see that, and what you see is that although the situation would have been painful, Ezra purges all these foreign women out of the Jewish camp, and it preserved the Jews' national identity and their whole religious faith instead. The other thing, let me see if anything more I wanted to talk about with Ezra before we go on to Nehemiah. What I will say is about Ezra is that Ezra motivated the people. Oh, sorry, Pam. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just had a question because earlier I thought they said that they married their sons to foreign daughters and
their daughters to sons.
Yeah. So what happened to the foreign boys? The Jewish daughters that married foreign boys.
Let me see something. Hold on. 1 second. Let me just check something here.
And you're probably done with Ezra. I'm sorry for dragging you back.
It's a good question.
But is in the Orthodox Jewish religion, is that still the same, that if you're Orthodox Jews,
you have to convert if you want to marry an Orthodox Jew?
So they can't marry someone who's not Orthodox?
They have to be converted.
Okay.
Oh,
I'm gonna assume that they.
Listen, it is read incorrectly, Pam. That's why I wanted to check. You're talking about chapter 9, verse 2. They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons. So it is the men who took these wives.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
I do, yes.
So
I misheard it.
Right.
Right.
The way how it is written is a little bit tricky, but but what it's saying is that these men took their daughters as wives for themselves, and daughters here does not necessarily mean only the daughters of these people. It just literally means women. It took these women,
right?
Took these women as wives for the men, which is like the fathers, and for their sons. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess I was looking at verse 12. But verse that 12. Was the prohibition.
Same book? Of the same book?
Yeah.
Of the same chapter?
Yes, but that was the prohibition, not the statement of fact.
Yes. No, right, exactly. Okay. Yes. So that's why.
Yeah.
Somebody else had their hand up, I thought. Did anybody
Did,
else?
but I've looked it up on Google, and I don't know whether you want Google's answer.
What's Google's answer?
According to
what?
Jason Berry of the New York Times, the requirement of celibacy is not dogma. It is an ecclesiastical law that was adopted in the Middle Ages because Rome was worried that clerics' children would inherit church property.
You see what I tell you? Oh my God!
It is the property then. All right. Perfect.
Oh, you see, now I told you, it had to do with
That
a
makes more sense,
property
okay.
issue. It had to do with a property issue. It had to do with a property issue.
Well,
That's
that's
what I was
crazy.
told. It was a property issue. And I
Yeah.
could not understand
I'll put that
why
there.
would children be inheriting church land or wives getting church land.
Oh my goodness.
Why just don't take it out of the bishop's hands?
Why don't they just change that? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's been an issue for a while. Yeah.
Why you don't just change that? Because that's what I was told. It was a property issue. That's what I
Yeah, it
was
was
told. So
800
that is
years ago, they
interesting
could
to hear
change
that. It is
I
interesting.
think that's true. Obviously
Thank you for sharing it. Still ask Nathaniel.
I will.
But
I'll
thank you for
confirm.
sharing that, Marilyn. Thank you for sharing that. Because I
Well,
was
they've
told-
made this big deal about priests being married to God. So how are they going to go backtrack on that?
Yes.
Yeah,
They
that's
don't
what
have
they're,
to.
That would be very difficult to backtrack on all this time, you know, that priests
story
are
is-
married to God
married
and they cannot be married to a woman because it would take away their love for God and you know, the church. So
Yeah.
they're married to God in the church. So
And you see, the thing is about it is celibacy was never meant to be an imposition. Celibacy is not an imposition. Celibacy is often seen, when I say a gift, is whether or not you have that gift of celibacy. You have that desire for celibacy. It was never meant to be something imposed on. And so, I mean, I have heard that whole celibacy thing too about marriage to God and all of that, and I mean, even when in the Anglican Communion years and years and years ago, they used to tell you, you know, as a priest, it may be better for you not to be married, so that you could dedicate your whole life to the church.
Right.
That was something that was purported. That was a big thing.
brainwash.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it brainwash, but it was just that they were rather you, because I mean, I'll tell you honestly, the priesthood is a very, very
Right.
it's not easy. It is not an easy thing. And so that was advocated in the Anglican, I don't know if, and maybe the Episcopal Church as well. But yeah, and you know, St. Paul tells you it's better to stay not married, but at least it's better to be married into words. St. Paul tells you that too. He says, if you have a choice, be not married. But if you can stay not being married, but then it's better to marry than to burn. Yes, Marilyn.
We have to remember that we look at it from our standpoint here and legal issues and property divisions and so forth and ownership. But if you go back to the Middle Ages, it was the priest who was the rule of the area.
Correct. He owned the property.
Well, but in
There's no
addition,
doubt,
he was the authority.
He was the authority, and the property was invested
the Lord
in him.
was. The Lord of the manor was the authority.
feudal-
The priest was the advisor.
Now, listen.
Sorry, we're having a sisterly argument. We'll stop.
Yeah, okay, well, whatever.
Why
Whatever.
didn't let me finish, Pam, but that's okay.
Listen. I mean, I'll tell you this. In Barbados, they were the way how the system was set up was quite typical to the English system, where the church had a lot of land. Yeah, the lord of the manor, the plantation owner, he had his part, but the church also had their part. And that used to be, it wasn't the priest's property per se, like how it is in the Roman church, but the priest was in charge. He had the authority of it to do as he restored in Zion. Which is very true what Marilyn was saying. But I mean, you had the plantation, he had his piece with all the sugar cane and all the people cutting the sugar cane, all that. But then you had what was called the ecclesiastic. In fact, the church used at the time called it the glebe land. That's what they used to call it, glebe land. That was fair. And there's still glebe land in Barbados today. There's still glebe land in Barbados. Some of it has been sold, but there's still a lot of it still exists. Yeah, yeah, but you know, the church is. All right. So to conclude on Ezra, as we know that his purpose for coming back to Jerusalem was to make sure that there was observance of the law, that there was temple worship. He established the Jewish religion until it was, or I should reestablish the Jewish religion as until the destruction of the temple again, which happened in AD 70. He was very much caused the Jewish people, to come back to adhering to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And he was able to bring, because you got to remember, these exiles were coming back. They were away for quite some time. They had lost their identity by being in a foreign land. And now they needed to come back and reinvent themselves. And so Ezra was able to help them reinvent themselves back into what it meant Jewish. Because, a lot of, which is versus other religions, a lot of what Judaism is about is that Judaism focused primarily on the religious aspect. Yes, there was a physical aspect, and everything, but it was mainly the religious and spiritual aspect. And so Ezra came and to make sure that that was reinvented and restarted. And so he even reintroduced the strict observance of the Sabbath, because people were doing all kinds of things on the Sabbath instead of what the Sabbath was intended for. And he made sure that they returned to strict observance of the Sabbath. He also reinstituted whole things of temple offerings and temple tithing and that sort of thing. He renewed this whole notion of various festivals that the Jews celebrated and that kind of thing. So that was his major focus. Where, as I say, while Nehemiah focused on the physical, he focused on the spiritual. Any questions on Ezra before we go into Nehemiah quickly?
Nope.
All right. Let's go to Nehemiah. And I mean, as I said, there's a little bit of Nehemiah that overlaps into Ezra. After all, Ezra is in the book of Nehemiah as well. But the name
Nehemiah only has 13 chapters. It's a very short one.
Yeah, the name Nehemiah means Yahweh comforts. That's what it means. Yahweh comforts. And what Nehemiah is renowned or known for is for putting Israel back into a kind of kind of like a urban setting. He was the one who will rebuild Jerusalem, particularly the Jerusalem wall after it was destroyed. He was a close colleague of Ezra, as we all know, and he was also one of the exiles who were in Babylon and who returned at a different time to Ezra to reestablish Judaism, the Jewish state in Judah. And so Nehemiah rebuilt the Jerusalem walls so that the city, which was destroyed and abandoned, could be repopulated. He was a governor. He became a governor in his own right at that time, and he where we meet him in the book is that he is in Persia, in the Persian capital of Susa. So we have to realize, Ezra came from Babylon, but he came from Persia, which is now today modern Iran. And Nehemiah is like similar to Esther and Daniel. Those of us who did Esther will know that Esther was of humble beginnings before she became the queen. And Nehemiah, in a similar light, was a cupbearer in the king's palace. And a cupbearer does not mean that he just took the cup. The cupbearer means he had to taste the wine before the king drank, so that if it was poisonous, then Nehemiah would die and not the king. And so he did that, but he raised from being the cupbearer, and he was a darn good one, it appears. He raised from being that to becoming governor and seeing to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. But one of the things, when we go into Nehemiah and we look at Nehemiah chapter 1, is that when he got the news that his fellow exiles, his fellow exiles, that the walls of Jerusalem had been destroyed, he sat down and he wept and he mourned for days. And chapter 1 in Nehemiah tells us that. And really and truly, he blamed the disaster on the failure of the exiles to obey God's commandments that was given to Moses. So, and Nehemiah was a religious man as well. He also trusted in God. So one day, then, when we get into chapter 2 of Nehemiah, one day when he was serving the king wine, the king recognized that his face looked very sad, and his countenance he looked sad, and the king asked him if something was wrong, and he said, the city the place where his father's graves are buried, it lays desolate, it lays like a waste. And Nehemiah asked for a request of absence to go, and the king granted it to him. And he left. He went. And whereas, as I said earlier, that Ezra didn't take any military help with him, because he told the king already that God will help him. So now, but Nehemiah does differently. That Nehemiah does take some help with him. And so he went to rebuild the city, but it was with the understanding that one day he will return back to the king. And so off he goes. And one thing about Nehemiah is that when he gets to Jerusalem, he enters the community with confidence, but he also enter it with some sensitivity. I'll get us to read. Let me see. Hold on a second. I want someone to read Nehemiah chapter 2 and verses 11 to the end. Who would like to read? Somebody who hasn't read yet. Who would like to read?
I already read, so I'll let somebody else read it.
Oh, I feel like reading.
You want to read, George?
Sure.
Go ahead. We badger you enough. We can let you read. Poor George. Go ahead, George.
When I had arrived in Jerusalem, I first rested there for 3 days. Then I set out by night with only a few other men, for I had not told anyone what my God had inspired me to do for Jerusalem, and with no other animals but my own mount. I rode out at night by the valley gate, passed by the Dragon Spring, and came to the Dung Gate, observing how the walls of Jerusalem lay in ruins, and its gates had been eaten out by fire. Then I passed over to the Spring Gate and to the King's Pool. Since there was no room here for my mount to pass with me astride, I continued on foot up the wadi by night, inspecting the wall all the while, till I once more reached the valley gate, by which I went back in. The magistrates knew nothing of where I had gone or what I was doing, for as yet I had disclosed nothing to the Jews, neither to the priest, nor to the nobles, nor to the magistrates, nor to the others who would be concerned about the matter. Afterward I said to them, "You see the evil plight in which we stand, how Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been gutted by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so that we may no longer be an object of derision." Then I explained to them how the favoring hand of my God had rested upon me, and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us be up and building." And they undertook the good work with vigor. On hearing of this, Sanballat the Honorite, Tobiah the Ammonite slave, and Geshem of the Arab mocked us and ridiculed us. "What is this that you are about?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" My answer to them was this: "It is the God of heaven who will grant us success. We, his servants, shall set about rebuilding. But for you, there is to be neither share, no claim, nor memorial in Jerusalem."
Thank you, George. So here you see in this part of the book that Nehemiah, when he comes with confidence, but he also comes with sensitivity. And he surveys the land first before he decides what he's going to do. And the way how he does it is that he doesn't want to put people make people uneasy. He does it in the nighttime. He goes, he takes just a few persons. He doesn't tell anybody what he's doing. And but he wants to see, he's not being intrusive. He wants to see what's going on and how best to tackle this process. And that's what he does. And then he then goes on then to confront those who he needed to confront, to let them know then what he has done, what the state of the affairs are, and what they need to do. And it is interesting, and he also mentions that he has the support of God and he has the support of the king in order to do what he wants to do. And since Judah, where he was, belonged to the Persian Empire, obviously then you could not take Nehemiah's claim to authority lightly. You couldn't take it lightly. And so, and people straight away started saying, "Let us start building the walls." And the
Yes.
let us start building the walls. So the people, he was able to organize the people in such a way that they can center themselves on the task of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. One of the good things, and you read that later on, is the way how they set about rebuilding these walls, in that people would build the wall that was closest or in front of their home, and they went around doing so. Various people joined in. You even found that in chapter 3, the first verse, you see the high priest and the fellow priest went to work and rebuild the sheep gate. And they dedicated it and set its doors in place and all this sort of stuff. And if you realize, I mean, you don't see a whole lot of it in the part that George read, but you'll see a number of gates, the dung gate, which meant that's where the dung, what we call them now, the dumps, that would be the gate closest to where the dump is, or if you had the sheep gate, that's the gate that the sheep went through. If you had the horse gate, that's the gate that the horses went through. You know, each gate had a symbolism. There was a reason for the naming of the gates because they were all for particular purposes. And one of the things you will realize too, when you read chapter 2, is that as the work progressed, the people's sense of pride and community and their heritage began to return, and they were starting to feel proud of what they were doing. And even it tells you, so they began this good work. But then there were these three guys who opposed what they were doing, who tried to mock them and ridicule them, and even call them feeble Jews. Later on in chapter 4, they called them feeble Jews, and claimed that the construction was so poor that if a fox goes on it, he will break down their stone wall. They felt that opposed to it. But one of the good things about this is, is that Nehemiah felt that his critics were plotting an attack, and so he strategically stationed people, armed men, to various parts of the walls to protect the workers.
Father, I have to leave.
All right, Bryce. Have a good night. Good to hear you.
You too, and I will see you. I will see you in church in 2 weeks.
All right, good, buddy. Good. Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks. And then they also tried to fix all the breaches that were in the walls, and it is when that they were fixing all of these breaches and the walls were really coming together well. Not to mention that they did it in a remarkable 52 days, to the surprise of everybody, that this wall could be built so quickly. Then you get Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, who then wanted to negotiate with Nehemiah, and Nehemiah refused to negotiate because he felt it was a trap. He declined their offer. He ignored a whole number of appeals from them. And then finally, I think it was Sanballat who sent a letter claiming that Nehemiah was planning a rebellion, so as to get him out of favor with the king, because then the king will feel as if he was trying to take over, which was not true. But the only thing is that we don't know is, why was it so important to Sanballat and Tobiah and to Geshem, why they were so opposed to the revitalization of Jerusalem. I wasn't sure that I found what that was the reason for that, just that they were opposed to it.
Hello?
Yes.
This might be a silly question, but were they Jews? They were Arabs.
It talks about Geshem being an Arab. I don't think they would have been. I'm trying to think that they would not have been Jewish. An Ammonite was not a Jewish person.
Okay.
So I don't know. The Horonite, I am not sure who that was. But let me see.
Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites.
Yeah.
Why would they become furious? Right.
Wait, hold on a minute. Oh, Sanballat was the governor of Samaria. So yes, he would not have been classified as Jew. So yes, none of them were Jewish.
No.
None of them were Jewish.
Makes
But
sense.
they were, obviously they felt threatened by this resurgence of the Jews in Judea resurfacing. So I think as I said, Jews and Gentiles did not get along. Jews and Samaritans did not get along, and so to have the Jews coming back in full force would not have been a good thing. I'm sure the Samaritans felt good that they were not around. But Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, so he obviously was not pleased. Let me see, where am I? But they were able to rebuild the wall in a very short period of time, and they were able to go about also they were able to dedicate it. And what it also did was Nehemiah wanted, once the building project was completed, Nehemiah wanted at least 1/10 of the people to be living within the environs of the city, whereas only the leaders lived there, and the rest of the people like to live out in the countryside. But they wanted 1/10 of the people to live, and so they had to cast lots to see who would dwell in the city, whereas 90% will remain in their respective homes. So it meant that these people who had to come and move into the city had to abandon their city, had to relocate, to the abandoned city. And those who volunteered and drafted and all that, they were commended and blessed for answering that call. One of the things that we need to also realize is that although the building of the wall took a short space of time to do, it took a much longer time, generations, for the values and the systems that used to be in place to get back into place. It was already building the walls, but the mind and the thinking, you have to get them back into what used to be, because they were accustomed to what was when they were in Babylon, and now or wherever they came from, and now they needed to get back to what used to be. So getting back to that what used to be was much more difficult. However, Nehemiah worked to help to address the social conditions of people that were there. One of the other things we need to look at when we read the book of Nehemiah is that Nehemiah returned to Persia. We are not sure if he was summoned back or if he just simply went back because he promised that he was coming back. But he did go back to serve the king. He did spend a good month of time there. And then when he returned again to Jerusalem, all the systems that he had put in place had all gone through the window. People went back to their old ways, doing all the reforms that he had put in place that did not last. The city had collapsed, lost its vision, lost the whole commitment to serving God and honoring God and serving the needy. All of that went through the window, and he was back at square one. And so you find, let me see, if you look at Nehemiah, I think that was Nehemiah. Well, let me see here.
Still these people.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second, please. One of the things, let's see, where is it? One of the things that, did anyone look at the when they were talking about, you realize there were two accounts of the people returning, the exiles who were returning. There's an account in Ezra, and there's an account in Nehemiah. Did anyone sit and look to see if the numbers or the names corresponded?
Oh, no. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I skipped it both
Good
times.
idea, though.
No, you shouldn't. You should
I
have
should,
done.
you're right.
You should look at that because they're almost identical, but they're not totally identical.
We're close. What are you gonna
They're
do?
close. They're close in their numbers, but some parts are a little bit missing by 10 people or
That's
one.
acceptable. I think that's a standard deviation. It's okay.
So I just wondered if you had read those. But yeah, so Nehemiah, he had to start the whole process all over again, and he prayed to God. I'm trying to find a chapter, and I'm not.
6 verse 10.
Oh,
No.
I mean, where he's rebuking them? It's chapter 13.
chapter 13.
13. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the last chapter. That's what I was looking for, but
National Confession of Sin.
Verse 17, I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this wicked thing you are doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Is that the area you're?
Yes. Thank you, Pam. Yes. And so you see him doing this because he came back and he found that they had gone back to their old ways of desecrating stuff and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is, and this was a prayer from him, from Nehemiah, he ends with the prayer. But the thing is about his prayer, look at his prayer. And he criticizes what they have done, and then he says, remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. He's like, oh, these folks did these wrong things, but remember me, I didn't do them. I'm a good man, So remember, it's almost like the guy on the cross. Remember me when you come into your kingdom, that I'm a good person. And he does this. You see him doing it in verse 14. He does it again in verse 23, 22.
Yeah.
He does it again at verse 29. He does it again at verse 31, where he keeps saying, "Remember me, God, basically for all the good that I have done." Yeah. Anyone have any questions on him? So really and truly, whereas, as I said, Ezra came to focus on the spiritual, Nehemiah came to focus on this physical rebuilding of Jerusalem. And I mean, he did a good job. He accomplished what he was meant to accomplish. Obviously, both him and Ezra would have been frustrated at the fact that the people did not continue the way they should. But at least Ezra was able to put those reforms in place, even although the people did not keep to them, they were back in place so that they will need to get back. They can easily get back. Yes, Linda.
Just one question. I mean, I understand that the point of this story is the fact that they kept going back to their old ways, but just so I can get it straight in my mind, there was talk about building a temple, and then the wall was in disrepair. So I'm not sure about the timing.
Well, the thing about the temple is that I think we would have read this. They were also building the temple, and the rebuilding of that temple got aborted.
Okay.
The rebuilding of that temple got aborted, where who was it? one of the kings put where's one of the letters? One of the letters, if you look in the letters, that there was a couple of letters that one of the kings put an end to that. But then, and so it was stopped for a number of years. And then after, and then it was King Darius, who authorized the rebuilding of the temple and told them not to stop it from taking place.
Was Nehemiah there during that process, or where was he?
He would not have been. That would have been after.
He was because he was serving a later king.
Darius would have been a later king. Darius would. Nehemiah would not have been with him.
Okay.
One of the things to this, which I was going to mention, it just came to mind. I'm looking for it. Hold on 1 second. I'll get it for you. Where is it? Here we go. And if you were to look at chapter 7, one of the things that came up that stood out to me too is how, this verse could probably be attributed to what we have today. If you look at Ezra chapter 7, verse 24, it reads, verse 24, he says, "You are also to know that you have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of the priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers at this house of God." And this is the King Xerxes writing to Ezra, and it is interesting because I said, no taxes. Today, taxes are not placed on churches, and who knows that this could have been from since back then. That we see that no taxes was to be placed, and well, this say to on the individuals, but at this house of God. So I thought that was an interesting connection to what happens today, where that could have come from. Any questions?
No, it was interesting.
Yes.
I have lots, but I'm tired.
I am too.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
I am too. So, well, at least you will not have classes for the next 2 weeks. We will not have class for the next 2 weeks. So we will not have class. No, we don't have class next week, Wednesday, May 1st, or Saturday, Wednesday, May 8th.
Okay.
And then on May 15th, we will finish the last of the Old Testament people, Isaiah. And then after that, we will go into the New Testament, folks.
Okay, sounds
good.
Yeah. I'll be out. I won't be here, sorry. The 15th?
When, the 15th of May?
I'm going to miss that, yeah. And Isaiah is Nathaniel, they named all of their children after the books of the Bible. Isaiah is my oldest grandchild from this.
It is interesting that you say Isaiah. It's interesting you say Isaiah. The Americans say Isaiah, and the English says Isaiah. So it is interesting.
Yeah.
So we have to wait.
Sorry to miss that, though. Sorry to miss that. What's that?
We have to wait for the answer from your son-in-law.
Yeah, well, I think it's right. I think Google's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, it had to do with property. It had to do with property.
Okay, we'll take that.
But there was some other ruler who was really in charge of it, who was really pushing the church to do it. I would guess. I don't know who the higher priests were, or who the big chiefs were. Anyway.
Yeah, but I was always told that it had to do with property.
Oh, it's property, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't,
that
I
was-
really,
Property
I
is
really,
power. Remember, it's all about power.
yeah, and I could not believe
Mm.
it because you can change that in the just how it works in the Episcopal Church. Yes, Marilyn.
So when we say property, we don't just mean land.
No, it means everything, not
Yeah.
only land, but
Yeah.
it meant also the
And-
churches and it meant the things of the church.
All right.
And
Things like- yeah.
even the Middle Ages, Rome and the city of the church was significant.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yes.
All
Slave.
those silver candlesticks, you know?
Yeah, that's what I said. All the items, all the
That's
everything
right.
that belongs to the
France,
church.
but-
Yeah, I want those more ornate ones. They look more expensive than these other cheaper ones.
With the rubies in there, yeah.
I
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
the wife saying, I want those rubies, those that gold ornate looking altar. I want that.
Oh, my.
That's why they kept building bigger and bigger so they could have more and more.
But no, it's well,
Good.
it's
That's a good-
let's not make fun of it. I'm sorry, but
I know.
it's just that I think there are other ways that we could get around that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So that if folks want to get married, they gotta get married. I mean, there are priests in the Episcopal Church who are married and priests who are not. Some want to get married, some don't.
Right.
And as I said, celibacy was not meant to be an imposition, but
Unfortunately, it has though, because the number of men entering priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church is always a struggle. I don't know what the numbers are now, but I know it has increasingly decreased and I always thought celibacy was the big issue as to why.
Mhm.
Maybe that's not, I don't know.
I heard in South America though that the Pope has granted exceptions because
Oh.
finding priests down there to go into the Catholic Church is very, very difficult.
Mhm.
And for that is one of the reasons is that they want to get married.
Right. Ouch.
That because there's such a shortage of priests that in some areas of South America, they're getting special dispensation, if that's what it's called, and allowing them to marry.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could eventually change. Oh,
We'll see. We'll see.
Whatever, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Have a good night,
Right.
everyone. Pam,
Right.
thank you so
Thanks,
much. And
Pam.
Marilyn, thank you. Thank you all so
Thank you,
much.
Friday.
Have a good night. And
Wrong button.